Addis Ababa Fairy Tales and Bedtime Stories for Kids. Pollyanna. With her golden hair, always smiling face, Pollyanna was a 10-year-old little girl spreading joy around her. But she had lost her parents when she was really young and was left all alone. For some time, she stayed in the orphanage. After some time had passed, her wealthy aunt accepted to look after her. Her aunt, Miss Polly, prepared the small attic for Pollyanna. The housemaid Nancy was really happy about this. Hopefully our little guest will be successful in cheering up grumpy Miss Polly. When arrived at home, Pollyanna was crying with happiness. She hugged her auntie around her neck, but her auntie was somewhat serious. She took Pollyanna and showed her to her room. Pollyanna was stunned when she saw the size and the wealth of this house. Her auntie showed her room in the attic. "This is your room, and dinner starts at 6 p.m. Don't forget." Pollyanna liked her room very much. Having seen all the other rooms in the house, Pollyanna did not bother to think once as to why her auntie gave her the room in the attic. Right at 6 o'clock, Miss Polly sat at the dinner table, but Pollyanna had not arrived yet. "Where is this girl?" "Would you like me to go and call her, Miss Polly?" "No." After dinner, Miss Polly went over to her room and noticed the room was empty. She immediately went over to the garden to tell the gardener that she was missing. The gardener, on the other hand, pointed over to a rock on the hill. She was over there. In a rush, Nancy ran over to Pollyanna, and together they made their way to the villa. Didn't matter what the situation was, Pollyanna always managed to keep a positive attitude about everything. This left Nancy amazed. She asked Pollyanna what the secret to this was.
"The glad game. My father taught me this. When I was young, a very helpful lady once sent us crutches. When I asked as to why, she said, so that as long as they were in our sight, we would be able to appreciate the fact that we didn't need to use them and be glad. It is because of that day that whenever me and Daddy feel like we're in doubt, we think of that day and we find a reason to be glad."
Further into the evening, Pollyanna was in her room on her bed, crying hysterically.
"Father, my father who lives amongst the angels. I'm trying to play our game, you know that. But if you were stuck in an attic, in the dark, sitting all by yourself, you too would find it hard to be glad."
The following day, Pollyanna went downstairs to the garden and hugged her auntie.
"Auntie, beloved auntie, this morning I am so grateful to be alive."
"Is that how we say good morning?" After having said this, Aunt Polly turned around and left. Watching them from afar, the old gardener's eyes went watery. He then went over to Pollyanna and told her how much she looked like her mother. Knowing that the gardener knew her mother made her happy. As time went on by, Pollyanna's life at the villa had gotten better. She would have her breakfast, then straight after, start doing her homework with her auntie. And then after lunch, she would have free time until 6 o'clock. She would even do some of the grocery shopping for the house. One day, in the town, she saw a man wearing a long black coat with a cylinder-shaped hat. Although she tried being friends with him, she couldn't make much sense out of what the man was saying to her. Some time had passed, and she saw the same man again. She tried to talk to him once again. This time round, he too made conversation with her. Nancy was in shock, because although the man, Mr. Pendleton, was very wealthy, he lived in a huge house all by himself, and never ever did he speak to anyone. The following day, Pollyanna went home with a very
Visit your very own travel expert at Flight Centre Brighton, because Joe's booked 12,000 flights.
The following day, Pollyanna went home with a very weak dog. Miss Polly didn't say a word. But the following day after that one, she brought a boy home and Miss Polly was extremely cross with her. Enough, Pollyanna. Amongst all the other hideous things you've done, this is by far the worst. As if it wasn't enough that you brought all the cats and dogs from the streets, now you're bringing beggars to my house.
I'm not a beggar, madam.
After having said that, the boy rushed out of the house, but Pollyanna was determined to save this kid from the streets. In September, Pollyanna started school. It didn't take long for Pollyanna to like her school. One day, during a visit, Mr. Pendleton asked Pollyanna not to leave and if she could stay with him. Of course, it was impossible for Pollyanna to give an answer. Mr. Pendleton explained everything to Pollyanna.
Back when I was young, I fell in love with your mom. I loved her dearly. But your mom never loved me back. Then soon later, she married your father, and they moved away from the city.
Ever since that day, Mr. Pendleton always seemed to be upset towards the world around him. He would always have a long face. But having Pollyanna look like her mother with her sincere looks made it possible for him to look at the world in a more positive manner. This way, by having Pollyanna next to him all the time, he would have a reason to live.
Move next to me, and together we will be happy. You can see me as a father, and I'll see you like a daughter.
But although her auntie didn't show it, she knew she loved her very much. And she didn't want to leave her auntie. She didn't know how to tell this to Mr. Pendleton. At last, she found a solution. She wanted Mr. Pendleton to take Jimmy in, the kid her aunt refused to look after, and thought this way both Mr. Pendleton and Jimmy would be happy, and Pollyanna could visit them both more often. Mr. Pendleton asked for them to come together the following week. But after a few days, a very unfortunate accident happened. A car hit Pollyanna. After opening her eyes a day later in the hospital, Pollyanna was very happy to be alive. She didn't want her auntie to leave her side. She was living the happy moment of her auntie calling her my darling. A few days later, Pollyanna had left the hospital, but she could no longer use her legs. When Mr. Pendleton visited Pollyanna, he told Miss Polly about his offer to Pollyanna and how she rejected the offer due to her auntie. After hearing this story, Miss Polly's love suddenly grew much bigger for her. Just so that her niece would be happy, she would allow the cats and dogs to go up to her room. She would allow anything that made Pollyanna happy. The doctor that they had been waiting for from the city came 1 week late. After Pollyanna's checkup, the doctor had to give the bad news.